everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we're going to be dealing another death blow to the Cabal and the Clinton Foundation and all these, people who think that they can just abuse and torture and control the people of the world without any consequence. And, I'm going to be reading another chapter from this book, AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire, The Deadly Virus of International Greed by Dr. Nancy Turner Banks, MD. Great book. And I read a chapter from this in my last video, and it really seemed to hit the nail right square direct on the head, considering the posts that have come out from QAnon over the last week and the news developments and stuff. So I'm just going to kind of drill a little bit more into that and read another chapter that I think is also relevant to this very much. And I guess as a little intro, referring to the Q post, basically he drew a lot of attention to Barack Obama appearing on the Jimmy Kimmel show, right? And it was this whole red, right, marketing promotion for anti-AIDS, HIV, right, throughout the world, in Africa, and there's Bono on there talking to Jimmy Kimmel, and then they bring in this video from Barack Obama all of a sudden, like, what? And, he basically there's music playing, and it's so nice, and it's like, we've worked with folks and citizens, and we've reduced AIDS, and it's because people working together. It's this dumb feel good message all about how they've supposedly done work to get rid of AIDS, but it's interesting because in that video he mentions that he's got files on aliens and stuff, and it's just it's a weird appearance, and Q basically is just poking and pointing at this connection of the red, right, and HIV and the Clinton Foundation and these great scam of all these supposed charities all over the world that aren't charities at all, but are actually covers for international criminal syndicates and all sorts of different enterprises, whether it's resource extraction, human trafficking, drug trafficking, right? Diamond trafficking, gold, right? All of it across the board. Anything that can be sold by these people will be. They're a cartel. It's like the mafia, except it's like the ultimate mafia, right? And basically that's what I'm going to be. This chapter is really just very, very pertinent to this whole conversation, and a lot of this is going to be about Africa specifically, but I think it's important when you're listening to this to keep in mind it's not just Africa, okay? This applies to Haiti, this applies to, all the things, in Bosnia, right? Okay, all these different hotspots around the world of human crisis where the Red Cross goes in, right? And, there's all this money donated and, none of it ever gets to the people, right? Like in Haiti with the Red Cross and the Clinton Foundation. And, again, if you're thinking that this is just like a little Clinton scam, this is just some little bit of corruption that Trump's dealing with, you really got to know the history here because it goes a lot bigger than anybody really seems to understand. And, I just listened to TRACY BEANZ video this morning about Q, and she made a little comment about the AIDS virus, about how the deep state, cultivated it as a weapon for depopulation. That's halfway true, okay? It's not fully true. The truth is there is no HIV virus. And this chapter gets into it a little bit more. There's other chapters within this book that just full-on nail it and just explain how the whole thing's been a scam to begin with. But again, this cartel is legal as well as illegal drugs, okay? So it's important when you look at Trump's kind of overall strategy and how he's interacting with all these different entities, it's important to realize where the connections are. And, when you really look at these connections, it's very, very difficult to just say, oh, Trump's part of the conspiracy, blah, 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 blah. There's something very subtle going on, and as Q talks about, there's war, right? The storm is upon us, and there is a full-on kinetic war going on right now between the intelligence agencies, and there's a lot of things in the news. Who knows? These fires down in L.A., who knows what that's about, But anyway, I'll just go ahead and start reading this chapter, and, hopefully you guys will get something from him. Chapter 8. Maurice Templeman, HIV/AIDS, and the U.S.-Israeli-African Geopolitical Strategy. And starts with a little quote from the Washington Guardian in the year 2000. 40 years after the murder of the Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba, evidence has emerged in Washington that President Dwight Eisenhower directly ordered the CIA to eliminate him. The evidence comes in a previously unpublished 1975 interview with the minute taker at an August 1960 White House meeting of Eisenhower and his national security advisors on the Congo crisis. The minute-taker, Robert Johnson, said in the interview that he vividly recalled the president turning to Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, in the full hearing of all those in attendance, and saying something to the effect that Lumumba should be eliminated. Mr. Johnson recalled, "There was stunned silence for about 15 seconds, and the meeting continued." Right, reminds me of Hillary Clinton and the we came, we saw, he died, right, with Libya. Again, all of this connected, right? And here's the beginning of the chapter. The South African Mail and Guardian reported that there is an international scramble for the wealth of the Congo and that billions of dollars will be made. There is a vast contrast between the billions to be made and the estimated $1 billion that left Katanga province in 2005 and the unending suffering of the average Congolese. One Congolese miner interviewed by Global Witness says, "We know that the Congo is rich, but despite this, we do not even have enough to eat. Only one category of people profits. Congolese live on an average of $100 a year, and 80% of the population lives on 30 cents a day. The Congo is a classic case of modern-day serfdom and the depravity of those seeking to benefit at the expense of others, even if millions more Congolese must die." Surely King Leopold II would have had a wry smile on his face, knowing that over 100 years later, the plunder and pillage that he began continued uninterrupted with impunity. King Leopold II was the king of Belgium, who basically colonized the Congo, and the book Heart of Darkness is about that. Basically, it's horrifying, and it hasn't stopped because it's the same people. Drugs, diamonds, gold, and deep politics. All diamonds currently on the market are blood diamonds. All of them. There are few, if any, exceptions. Like opium and cocaine commodities, they are used to purchase arms and finance civil wars, extra-legal covert activities, land theft, and genocide. Like opium, the profits are laundered through the international banks. There is no such thing as conflict-free stones, in spite of the whitewashing of the World Diamond Congress's Kimberley process. After Janine Roberts published her expose of the diamond industry, Glitter and Greed, and made the explosive documentary The Diamond Empire, depicting atrocities as routine business practice committed by the international diamond business, the industry was nervous to protect its image, profits, and monopoly control. In 2003, the U.S. Congress, which easily bends to the will of Maurice Templesman money and Israeli pressure, passed the Clean Diamond Act. Maurice Templesman is the representative for the diamond industry in the United States, huge deep state power player, but anyway, which was intended to sweep the idea of conflict diamonds into the mine shafts of history. The General Accounting Office noted in 2006 that the law was weak and deeply flawed. Since at least 1996, Russ Feingold, Democrat of Wisconsin, who co-sponsored the Senate version, has been heavily funded by Leon Templesman and Son, which is a diamond company. The Kimberley process was partially instituted through the work of Robert Rotberg at Harvard University, and Maurice Templesman chairs the International Advisory Council at the Harvard AIDS Institute of the School of Public Health. Rotberg and Templesman shared a panel at the Council on Foreign Relations with people like Walter Consteiner, National Security Director under Bill Clinton, with the director of a gold company involved in Congo's bloody eastern zone. With the help of Oprah publicizing the Kimberley process and the Hollywood propaganda film Blood Diamonds, diamond sales in the U.S. actually improved. The clueless hip-hop cultural icons epitomized by the vapid Kimora Lee Simons consider these blood diamonds a necessary statement to announce their total co-optation by the most degenerate elements of society. Diamonds are common and cheap. Their value is created by market control, well-placed propaganda, and market manipulation. Since the time of Cecil Rhodes, there have been millions of these worthless stones locked in the vaults of diamond bourses to ensure the artificially high, monopoly-fixed prices of such demon-worthless rocks of desire. This is a commodity that is tightly controlled by a small group of individuals who form a spider web of misery and intrigue that leads from South Africa to Tel Aviv to Brussels and New York. These sparkling gems are not a girl's best friend, but a warmonger's best asset of untraceable funds to pay for guns, corrupt politicians, assassins, and chaos in the pursuit of an agenda run out of Israel. When Jacqueline Kennedy's second husband died, she fell into the bed of Maurice Templesman, a man with deep links to the CIA, whose path was lined with blood diamonds, the apartheid system, and a holocaust of dead Africans. Maurice Templesman, Jackie's last lover until her death, is one of the men in the shadows who play the game of deep power politics. Templesman is a diamond trader and an economic hitman for the Oppenheimers, who control most of the diamond and many of the gold concessions in southern Africa. Although he was born in Belgium, he is part of a small group of individuals largely originating out of Israel and the United States who have ushered in unimaginable reign of terror and genocide in Africa that goes largely unreported or is grossly distorted by the Western media. The Templesman empire remains rock solid behind Leon Templesman & Sons, De Beers, and Lazar Kaplan International, supplier of Tiffany's and Cartier's diamonds. An economic hitman is a highly paid professional who cheats countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that since 9/11 has taken on new and terrifying dimensions for the people in the First World. These men, such as Templesman, are the true face of terrorism. They are highly paid middlemen, agents of business interests that choose to use terrorism and repression to shock populations into submission for the purpose of hijacking their natural assets. It was noted during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa that captains of industry, particularly those associated with diamond and gold mining, such as those represented by Templesman, pioneered many of the core features of what later came to be known as apartheid. These entrenched racist practices allowed firms to earn excess income by paying low wages and transferring the cost of ill health, old age, and work-related injuries to the workers themselves and to the women caregivers in the distant Bantustans. The problem of worker ill health stems from the hazardous and dirty businesses that diamond and gold mining are. These commodities are often embedded in asbestos or silica, which are substances that form fine particles during the mining process and are damaging to lung tissue. Both of these substances can form inflammatory scar tissue in the lung that can lead to cancer, respiratory diseases, and tuberculosis. Respiratory problems have been somewhat reduced in the U.S. mining industry because of OSHA rules, Occupational Safety and Health Division. The apartheid system deliberately supported hazardous mining conditions. It has taken a serious toll on the overall public health of southern African countries and directly relates to what is called AIDS in this area. Oppenheimer Anglo-American Corporation. Sir Ernest Oppenheimer and Lincoln William Honnold established the Anglo-American Corporation in 1917 with J.P. Morgan Finance. Morgan was the American agent for the English Rothschilds. In 1929, the company bought De Beers from the successors of Cecil Rhodes. Through Anglo, the Oppenheimers owned shares in all of South America's mining houses. The Oppenheimers also own the nation's largest steelworks, travel agency, brick factory, discount house, automobile dealership, and computer software firm. Anglo-American has become South Africa's largest banking concern. Anglo-American and De Beers control all of the diamond and gold mines in South Africa, as well as copper and coal. As of 2000, they controlled 80% of the world diamond market and almost half of the capitalization of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Even in post-apartheid South Africa, they reportedly run their mines like slave plantations and have doggedly refused to institute even minimal mine safety standards. Wherever De Beers, Anglo-American, and their partners such as Dan Gertler and his partner Benny Steinmetz and their company DGI do business, these substandard conditions are reported to occur. In 1995, the Leon Commission on Occupational Health published its report. The commission found that dust levels in the mines have not changed in half a century. The implication is that many thousands and perhaps millions of miners have died uncompensated of silicosis, asbestosis, tuberculosis, and cancer. The mining company knew that the risk of silicosis could be reduced by preventing the release of dust during mining or by providing miners with respirators. It should have provided clean overalls and adequate washing and laundry facilities. Finally, Anglo-American could have removed all dust from the miners' hostels, but protected by the apartheid system they helped introduce, the company did nothing. There are mining engineering companies that provide a variety of methods to control dust particles: wet dust suppression, dry dust suppression systems, foam or fog suppression systems, dust residual systems, and water cannon systems. Reportedly, these systems have seldom been effectively used in South Africa mining. In 1983, the chief safety engineer of an unnamed South African mining corporation told The Economist that production is more important than safety. Société Minière de Bakwanga, an Oppenheimer offshoot business, has been cited for shooting illegal diamond workers on its concessions in Mabuju Mayi, the diamond capital of the Congo. Every day, hundreds of unemployed Congolese take similar risks in the diamond fields of Mabuji Mayi, who wrote Amnesty International in 2002. And every day, dozens of gunshots ring out as guards employed by MIBA seek to deter illegal miners. The BBC reported in August 2006 that their security guards were sniping unemployed diamond miners. The average life expectancy of Congolese miners is about 42 years. In Angola, the people are literally mining for their lives. Miners in Angola are forced into illegal mining because Angola's mining security companies push people off their own land. While agriculture and commerce in the region require the direct authorization of the provincial governor, not one miner has been granted a license for diamond exploration or subsistence agriculture. The legitimate government of Angola forces desperate people to resort to illegal activities to survive. 3 private military companies, PMCs, have been targeting miners in Angola. The mercenary firms Alpha 5, Teleservices, and KMP Mineira defend Angola's big diamond firms like Sociedade de Desenvolvimento Mineiro, Sociedade Mineira de Congo, and Sociedade Mineira Luminas. Human rights researcher Rafael Marquez documented case after case of private military companies arresting, beating, and torturing local people. They stop locals from fishing in their rivers, growing their own food, or living traditional lives. They have forced sexual relations on family members, including same-sex rape and sodomy. The private military corporations operate behind Angola's public diamond company, Ndiama, and have exclusive rights to Angola's diamonds. Ndiama owns 99% of the shares in Sodium, that's one of the companies, the PMCs, which has a joint venture in Lazar Kaplan International, a Templesman family company. In South Africa, De Beers diamonds are embedded in asbestos, and hundreds of thousands of miners have suffered miserably or died of asbestos-related diseases, cancer and leukemia, with development of secondary tuberculosis. Diamond dust is extremely toxic, and as noted by the Lyon Commission, Anglo-American and De Beers took no action to protect their workers. As long as the system of apartheid was in place, they did not have to worry about black workers' rights. They had none. It was not until 1994, when the African National Congress gained political traction, that the mining companies began to contemplate their possible legal liabilities. This is when pulmonary tuberculosis suddenly became an AIDS-defining disease. De Beers claims that toxic dust in their mines is harmless and has refused to improve worker safety. Tony Davies, Professor Emeritus of Occupational Health, reported that when 200 retired miners from the Premier Diamond Mine were tested, every single one was found to have asbestosis. Yet very few know the danger. It has been hidden for decades. The company obtained legal exemptions from this dangerous feature of their mine operations on the basis that the dust in their mines is uniquely safe. It thus conducts what it calls dry mining. A CDC report from the Division of Respiratory Disease Studies estimated that the rate of pulmonary tuberculosis in South Africa rose from less than 40 per 1,000 in 1975 to 150 per 1,000 in 1998, an increase of 375% in 23 years. It is not surprising, according to reports, that the company has since blamed this rapid rise in the incidence of tuberculosis on AIDS, inferring that working conditions are irrelevant. The cynical use of AIDS as a method to neutralize potential legal action against Premier Diamond's substandard mining practices is rather typical of the impeccable business decisions of this organization. What possible liability could accrue to a company that has a graveyard full of dead workers and cities full of injured workers who have a disease that was sexually acquired? Exposure to silica dust is a risk factor for the development of pulmonary tuberculosis in the absence of silicosis, even after exposure to silica dust ends. It is not a coincidence that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the biggest killer in South Africa, and that the HIV antibody test cross-reacts with mycobacteria to make it appear that HIV is running rampant in South Africa. In Africa, all rules of medical diagnosis have been changed. In the U.S., a test known as ELISA is considered very inaccurate, and no diagnosis of HIV infection is made without performing another antibody test known as the Western blot for confirmation. However, for the most part, Africans are not even tested. It's too expensive. When they are tested, the least accurate ELISA test is used. HIV ELISAs are not accurate enough to diagnose an American Yet it is deemed accurate enough for Africans who are much more likely to test positive because of the cross-reactivity of the test to diseases like TB, malaria, leishmaniasis, and measles, diseases that have been common in Africa for generations. More on the cross-reactivity of HIV tests will be presented in the chapter on HIV testing. To compound the problem, in Africa, AIDS is usually not diagnosed with an antibody test at all. The diagnosis is instead based on nonspecific clinical symptoms. This is called a clinical case definition and was originally developed by the World Health Organization in 1985. It consists mainly of persistent fever, cough, and diarrhea and weight loss. It is nearly impossible to distinguish these symptoms attributable to AIDS from those of malaria, tuberculosis, or malnutrition. Diarrhea and weight loss are common problems in areas where there are both poor sanitation and lack of adequate running water. In the townships where the miners live, there are miserable squalid conditions, poor infrastructure including open sewers, squatters, high unemployment, and hardly any homegrown vegetables. Enteropathogens contracted as a result of such environmental conditions are directly associated with increased permeability of the small intestine, which leads to diarrhea and severe wasting in what has become known as slim disease. So, in Africa, the bar has been set extremely low to make an AIDS diagnosis. Contrast this with Europe and the United States, where AIDS is defined by a series of specific diseases or laboratory findings and a positive HIV test, often more than one. Contrary to all the rules of medical observation and diagnosis, the World Health Organization Bangui rules exist conveniently only in Africa. This has led to an era of medical abstraction and blunder, unprecedented in scope. The lack of any requirement for such a test in Africa means that, in practice, many traditional African diseases can be and are reclassified as AIDS. Even Myron Essex of Harvard, whose work speculated on the African origin of HIV, states that malnutrition and general lack of medical services contributed to diarrhea, tuberculosis, and other common African diseases that signify AIDS. Old disease dressed up as AIDS leads people to be stigmatized and isolated by their social group in such a way that the overwhelming nature of the diagnosis itself can lead to death. The rules are so arbitrary that if African patients left Africa, very few would remain AIDS cases. Postmortems are seldom performed in Africa to determine the actual cause of death. According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, Africa maintains the lowest levels of reliable vital statistics on any continent, a microscopic 1.1%. When AIDS experts are asked to prove actual cases of AIDS, terrifying numbers dissolve into vague estimates of HIV infection. This politicization of medical diagnosis has been a great economic benefit to the De Beers Anglo-American enterprise. Instead of their workers having plain old work-related TB, they are now cursed with an AIDS diagnosis. It is not a coincidence that Templesman chairs the International Advisory Council at the Harvard AIDS Institute and the School of Public Health. It makes good business sense. It is a way of protecting his profits by way of protecting the profits of the Oppenheimer companies. If the company had to pay living wages, correct its mine hazards, improve the living quarters of its workers, and pay restitution for the number of injured and dead workers that result from their standard business practices, the cost would certainly limit their obscene profits. In this respect, HIV/AIDS is stated in the Project for a New American Century document as a politically useful tool. The scientific literature on HIV antibody testing produced references to 70 diseases or conditions that could possibly cause false positive reactions on HIV, ELISA, and or Western blots. Many of the conditions are quite prevalent in Africa, including tuberculosis, malaria, leprosy, Q fever, tapeworms, or other parasites, as well as leishmaniasis. What was very interesting and worrisome to me as an obstetrician is that when the HIV tests are done in Africa at all, they are often done in prenatal clinics with the ELISA test, which is known to give frequent false positive results. One of the conditions that can trigger a false positive result is pregnancy. Even the packet insert in the ELISA test kit from Abbott Labs contains the disclaimer: there is no recognized standard for establishing the presence or absence of HIV-1 antibody in human blood. Furthermore, the placenta is full of what are called retroviruses, not to cause problems, but likely as messenger molecules involved in DNA replication and repair. In 1999, of 10 countries with highest incidence rate for 100,000 tuberculosis, 7 were in Africa: Mozambique 584, South Africa 526, Kenya 484, Mozambique 433, Ethiopia 397, Uganda 351, and the Democratic Republic of Congo 320. This is in comparison with U.S. rates reported in the Journal of American Medical Association in 2006 as 4.6. Tuberculosis began to decline in Western countries as a result of improved socioeconomic conditions that led, in turn, to better nutrition and living and working standards, application of primitive public health measures, and the dawning realization that tuberculosis was probably an infectious disease, and beginning sequestration of contagious consumptives in hospitals and sanatoriums. Rising rates of tuberculosis, like infant mortality, are indications of economic deterioration within a given society. All of the defined Bangui symptoms and African AIDS diseases have been endemic in Africa for generations. Kaposi sarcoma, an AIDS indicator disease, was described by physicians of Kemet about 1600 BC and described in the Ebers Papyrus stored in a library at the University of Leipzig, Germany. According to Professor P.A.K. Addy, head of clinical microbiology, Europeans and Americans came to Africa with prejudiced minds, so they are seeing what they wanted to see. I've known for a long time that AIDS is not a crisis in Africa, as the world is being made to understand. But in Africa it is very difficult to stick your neck out and say certain things. The West came out with those frightening statistics on AIDS in Africa because it was unaware of certain social and clinical conditions. In most of Africa, infectious diseases, particularly parasitic infections, are common, and there are other conditions that can easily compromise or affect one's system. Dr. Kanodi Athulu from the Cromwell Hospital in London expresses a similar view. Today, because of AIDS, it seems that Africans are not allowed to die from these conditions, from which they used to die before the AIDS era, any longer. If tens of thousands are dying from AIDS, and Africans do not cremate their dead, where are the graves? According to him, the uppermost question in the minds of intelligent Africans and Europeans in that continent is, why do the world's media appear to have conspired with some scientists to become so gratuitously extravagant with the untruth? The answer is fairly straightforward. AIDS is part of the business model being used by the West to explain away the numerous atrocities committed by extractive corporations as part of their routine business practices on this continent. Maurice Templesman, an icon of such business interests, has invested his entire life in supporting this business model whereby workers' lives are ended abruptly by deliberate business decisions that privilege profits over human life. The accumulating corpses of the dead become part of the mounds of human detritus left behind with the toxic sludge from the mines. It's just business. Templesman has played a key role over the course of the last 6 decades in the destabilization and economic ruin of several African countries. He has moved for years in the most powerful political circles and has counted the Roosevelts, Kennedys, and Clintons as friends. He arranged a meeting for Harry Oppenheimer with President-elect John F. Kennedy. He has helped to shape U.S. foreign policy in Africa in De Beers' favor for a long time. According to letters found in Justice and State Department files, Maurice had become Mr. Oppenheimer's unofficial U.S. representative in the 1950s when he was still in his 20s. He still visits Congress and the White House and has long been a powerful advocate for diamond cartel interests. By sitting on the board of the Harvard School of Public Health's AIDS Initiative, Templesman has made sure that the atrocities he instigates in Africa as a staunch advocate for mining interests are misconstrued as the HIV/AIDS crisis. They list him as follows. Maurice Templesman, chairman of the board of directors of Lazar Kaplan International, Inc., the largest cutter and polisher of ideal-cut diamonds in the United States. He is also a senior partner in the firm of Leon Templesman & Son, a company active in mining, trading, and a company active in mining, investments, and business developments and minerals trading in Europe, Russia, Africa, Latin America, Canada, and Asia. Mr. Templesman serves on the International Advisory Council of the American Stock Exchange. Mr. Templesman served as chairman of the Corporate Council on Africa until 2002 and is now chairman emeritus. A member of the Board of Trustees of the Africa-America Institute, and a past chairman, Mr. Templesman is also a director of the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs, the Center for National Policy, and the Business Council for International Understanding. This resume admits that Templesman is chairman of the American Jewish Congress, a Zionist pressure group that claims it works closely with the Israeli military. SEC filings show that Lazar Kaplan International directors are high-rolling lawyers and investment bankers. One director belongs to the law firm that once represented President Kennedy. LKI is also connected to the euphemistically named United States Agency for International Development, USAID, a front group used to control food politics. Templesman's participation in the National Endowment for Democracy is even more problematic. NED and its partners facilitate political interventions in foreign countries. The NED's core affiliate, the Center for International Private Enterprise, works, for example, with USAID in Afghanistan, opium, oil, and is linked to Bechtel. NED's core affiliate, the National Democratic Institute, counts Maurice Templesman and Madeleine Albright as directors. Richard Gephardt has served on the boards of NDI and NED, both of which funded Congo's historic national elections from 2004 to 2006, and have been funding the opposition MDC party in Zimbabwe for years. This has led to the continuing destabilization and stalled land reforms. NED directors tied to Templesman include Howard Wolpe, Richard Holbrooke, and Martin Abramowitz. Wolpe was Clinton's special envoy to Africa's Great Lakes regions and director of the Africa and U.S. National Interest Project of the 19th American Senate. Wolpe was on the board of Africare, as well as Joseph Kennedy and former Senator Bill Frist. Holbrooke is president/CEO of the Global Business Council on AIDS, whose director, Mark Moody Stewart, is a director of the Anglo-American Mining and former director of Royal Dutch Shell. Holbrooke and Templesman are on the board of the Africa-America Institute, along with former USAID official Gail Smith, Clinton's national security negotiator for Rwanda and Uganda, member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Corporate Council on Africa, whose chair is Maurice Templesman. This is the rest of the Maurice Templesman story. Belgian-born Maurice has a long history of association with the turmoil in the Congo and Central and Southern Africa that goes back to their initial independence from Belgium and the assassination of their nationalist first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, and subsequent installation of their chosen strongman, Mobutu. Templesman became a key supporter of this dictator before the murder of Patrice Lumumba by arranging the funding that flowed to Mobutu. When the newly independent Congo's first premier, Lumumba, pledged to return diamond wealth back to the Congo in the early 1960s, Templesman helped engineer the coup d'etat that consolidated the dictatorship of 29-year-old Colonel Mobutu. He was also involved in facilitating another coup, this time against Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. Diamonds were at stake in each. The Congo is the second largest country in Africa. For decades under Belgian rule, it was ruthlessly stripped of its natural resources: copper, tin, rubber, zinc, ivory, and agricultural products such as cacao, coffee, and palm oil. King Leopold claimed that everything in the Congo belonged to him. This was certainly true, as the Belgian government ran the country's railroads, mines, smelters, cacao and palm oil plantations, factories and roads, and hotels through front corporations. The corporations answered to King Leopold, and Leopold answered to the Rothschilds, who became the court bankers in 1853. All of that was threatened by an aspiring political leader by the name of Patrice Lumumba, who, in 1959, announced the formation of a national political party to oppose Belgian rule of his country. The Congo suffered years of unspeakable brutality under Belgian rule, especially the savagery experienced under Leopold II. Leopold's people committed gruesome horrors and churned the whole of the Congo into a massive slave labor camp. Leopold's people brutalized millions and slaughtered at least 15 million people. In just 23 years, Leopold's agents managed to kill half of the population. There was no Nuremberg for his crimes against humanity. There is no Holocaust museum for the people of the Congo for this disaster. At the famous colonial Tervuren Museum in Brussels, there is no mention of Leopold's crimes. Perhaps the Congo was the laboratory and the prelude for what Europeans did to other Europeans during World War II. Lumumba made the naive mistake of announcing to the world that he intended to nationalize the Congo's rich natural resources for the benefit of the embattled Congolese people. He was well aware how wealthy in natural resources his country was, and how this wealth had been stolen to enrich the Belgian crown and their investors. His idea of using the resources of the Congo for the Congolese people was anathema to the global economic power and especially to the Oppenheimers. Within 7 months of Lumumba's election, he was liquidated. His body was hacked to pieces and stuffed in a vat of acid. Today, to this day, he is the only truly democratically elected leader of the Congo. Templesman was also behind the coup to overthrow another popular African leader, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Nkrumah made several strategic moves that irritated the De Beers diamond cartel. The first was the marketing of Ghanaian diamonds outside the control of apartheid South Africa and De Beers. The second, and probably most frightening to European Israeli interests, was his pan-African vision of forming a defensive union of African states. On August 8, 1960, Nkrumah made a secret formal agreement with Lumumba to form a joint federal state of Ghana and the Congo. It was to have a common currency and joint foreign affairs and defense departments. It was going to be called the African Union Government. Other African states were to be invited to join, with a view to liberate the whole continent of Africa from colonialism and imperialism. This fact was made during the Cold War, when communism was the convenient foil. Nkrumah sought development aid from both camps. The CIA made their usual move, handpicked a former Ghanaian finance minister, Gabedma, and laid plans for a coup. Temples found in the State Department from George Ball castigated Templesman for the careless leak of the coup plans. The CIA's handpicked Ghanaian successor, the finance minister Gabedma, used Templesman's office in Accra rather than the U.S. Embassy to communicate covertly with the U.S. government. Even though the coup was mismanaged and evidence pointed directly to Templesman, U.S. President Kennedy, while publicly supporting the drive for Ghanaian independence, remained more appreciative of Templesman's role than Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs Ball, and he recommended that Templesman not be downgraded. Shortly afterwards, Kennedy approved legislation to allow diamond barter deals to be done for reasons of political advantage rather than U.S. stockpile requirements. This was effectively a permit for Templesman to arrange deals intended to support covertly pro-American Israeli African politicians such as Mobutu. This was the private, behind-the-scenes, deep political machinations characteristic of every U.S. president toward the African continent. Kennedy was no different than the rest. Templesman paid his way in blood diamonds for the Democratic Party to look the other way as the diamond industry commits genocide and land theft as routine business practices. Nkrumah was eventually overthrown in a CIA-backed coup in 1964. The new government predictably gave back to De Beers the exclusive marketing contract for their diamond production. Occasionally, Templesman is a big donor to the Republican Party, but he has predominantly been a deep pockets contributor to the Democratic Party. He has been a regular supporter of the campaigns of John Kerry, Ed Royce, Tom Daschle, Barack Obama, Maxine Waters, John Rockefeller, Richard Gephardt, Howard Wolf, Patrick and Edward Kennedy, Hillary Clinton, and the 1988 win of George H.W. Bush. Templesman also exploited ties with Anthony Lake, Clinton's national security advisor, who intervened at the U.S. Import-Export Bank on Templesman's behalf. Lake's influence allowed Templesman to gain U.S. Exim Bank and U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation backing for multi-million-dollar diamond projects in war-torn Angola and Congo. Templesman's interests in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, were negotiated through Lawrence Devlin, a longtime former station chief in Zaire who helped to arrange the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and the coup by a junior U.S.-trained officer, Mobutu Sese Seko. Devlin retired in 1974, but intervened with Mobutu's gang to ensure the prosperity of Templesman's diamond syndicate. Lake was a former Peace Corps volunteer to Ethiopia and once served on the national security staff of Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration. He wrote his Ph.D. dissertation at Princeton on Nixon's Africa policy with the title The Tar Baby Option. Lake returned to government in the Carter administration where he helped shape Africa policy. Lake recycles again as a national security advisor in the Clinton administration during the Rwandan genocide when, according to Samantha Power, during the entire 3 months of the genocide, Clinton never assembled his top policy advisors to discuss the killings. Anthony Lake likewise never gathered the principals, the cabinet-level members of the foreign policy team. Rwanda was never thought to warrant its own top-level meeting. When the subject came up, it did so along with and subordinate to discussions of Somalia, Haiti, and Bosnia. Whereas these crises involved U.S. personnel and stirred some public interest, Rwanda generated no sense of urgency and could safely be avoided by Clinton at no political cost. The editorial boards of the major American newspapers discouraged U.S. intervention during the genocide. They, like the administration, lamented the killings, but believed, in the words of April 17th Washington Post editorial, the United States has no recognizable national interest in taking a role, certainly not a leading role. However, this was less than the truth. There were U.S. footprints all over this orchestrated slaughter. From the beginning of the Rwandan Civil War in 1990, Washington's hidden agenda consisted in establishing an American sphere of influence in a region historically dominated by France and Belgium. The U.S. planned to displace France by supporting the Rwandan Patriotic Front and by arming and equipping its military arm, the Rwandan Patriotic Army. The genocide was sparked by the terrorist downing of a plane carrying 2 African heads of state, the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi, both Hutus, as well as many French officials. Wayne Madsen revealed that a French investigation in 2004 discovered a connection to an organization that goes by the name of International Strategic and Tactical Organization, ISTO, which represents political and corporate interests, including Armitage Associates, founded by George W. Bush's first Deputy Secretary of Defense, Richard Armitage, and Kellogg Brown and Root, then a subsidiary of Halliburton. Paul Kagame, who headed the Rwandan Patriotic Front, a militant organization formed in Uganda, had been trained at the U.S. Army Command and Staff College in Leavenworth, Kansas. The college focuses on fighting war and military strategy. Kagame returned from Leavenworth to lead the RPF shortly after the 1990 invasion. The Africa Director's submission to the UN Tribunal on Rwanda reported, from 1989 onwards, America supported joint Rwandan Patriotic Front Ugandan attacks upon Rwanda. There were at least 56 situation reports in U.S. State Department files in 1991. As American and British relations with Uganda and the RPF strengthened, so hostilities between Uganda and Rwanda escalated. By August 1990, the RPF had begun preparing an invasion with full knowledge and approval of British intelligence. After the slaughter, among the 99-person entourage who accompanied Clinton to Africa in 1998 was Maurice Templesman. Clinton reportedly came to review his diamond investments in Africa. This was exactly so. The blood diamonds had paid many to shut their eyes and hearts to the people of Central Africa, and slaughter was orchestrated to advantage American and Israeli business interests. The U.S. did nothing to interfere because they had 3 actors in the game: Laurent Kabila, who replaced Mobutu, Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, and Paul Kagame in Rwanda. Tutsi Rwandan exiles, headed by Paul Kagame, were an integral part of Museveni's army. As the genocide began, Kagame's forces launched an offensive from Uganda into Rwanda. It did not halt the massacre of Tutsis, but it succeeded in driving the disorganized Hutus into neighboring Congo. This was an excuse to invade the eastern Congo. The whole exercise was to destabilize and take control of the eastern Congo border, contiguous with Uganda and Rwanda that is resource-rich. The Americans were assured of their player in this contrived tragedy, the new head of the Rwandan Tutsi-dominated state, Paul Kagame. His forces then invaded eastern Congo, chasing the fleeing Hutus. Uganda and Rwanda are 2 of the largest recipients of U.S. and British military aid in Africa. Behind the local African warlords are the real players: Exxon Unilever, Branch Energy, and Bechtel, and the diamond cartels, among others. These are secretive corporations that, with the support of the U.S., UK, and French governments, fund, arm, and train private mercenary armies. With their secret backers and alliances, African leaders like Paul Kagame and Yoweri Museveni and their many jungle warlords have waged war as cover for private profit. These proxy armies are depopulating parts of Africa. In 2003, UN Chief Prosecutor Del Ponte described how she was told that she must drop all investigations of Kagame's crimes or risk being removed from office. When Judge Del Ponte insisted that the evidence required that he be prosecuted for war crimes and genocide, she was removed from her office at the Rwanda Tribunal within 90 days, at the insistence of the US and Britain. The ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, has evidence, Military One Exhibit DNT 365, that specifically implicates the direct involvement of Paul Kagame and his military in the 1994 fatal rocket attack that killed 2 presidents and French nationals. To show how selectively the United States pursues the so-called war on terrorism, Kagame seems to be Africa's version of Pol Pot, lectured and was honored in 2008 and MIT, and he was one of 100-time finalists for 2009 of the most influential people of the world. According to the CIA factbook, the Democratic Republic of the Congo abounds with cobalt, copper, niobium, tantalum, petroleum, industrial and gem diamonds, gold, silver, zinc, manganese, tin, uranium, coal, hydropower, and timber. All of these resources are exploited by European, Israeli, and American corporations that maintain their own mercenary armies to guard the extraction fields. For generations, they have run their patches of Congolese land-like governments with the support of France, Belgium, the United States, Israel, and other powers. The so-called civil war effectively gave them full autonomy in the wake of Mobutu's corrupt demise, as the power of the central government in Kinshasa crumbled. Mass carnage raged around them, but did not interrupt the extraction process. As the Washington Post concurs, the Congolese genocide has not become part of the American political discussion. It's just business, and a lucrative one at that. Since the initial coups to topple Africa's post-colonial Pan-African leaders, diamonds have been extensively used to discreetly fund wars, coups, repression, worldwide terrorism, and dictatorships in Africa and abroad. In a green paper on private military companies, the UK government accused De Beers of employing such military companies for covert reconnaissance in Botswana, Namibia, and Angola. De Beers was listed 5 times. No other company was listed more than once. Diamonds can pay for a lot of private military contractors. Such private armies are popping up all over Africa. The use of private military contractors enables the governments and corporations who use these contractors to cover their tracks and avoid accountability. These groups seem to be operating at will and outside local or international law. Evidence that may otherwise be made available to the public under Freedom of Information legislation is impossible to obtain from private contractors. The Vinel Corporation was the groundbreaking PMC directly involved in military and intelligence operations in Southeast Asia from 1965 to 1975. At the height of the Vietnam War, it had more than 5,000 employees in Vietnam. The Pentagon described the force as our own little mercenary army in Vietnam. We used them to do things we either didn't have the manpower to do ourselves or because of the legal problems. Africa is plagued by poverty as a consequence of assault from the slave trade, years of colonial rule, World Bank and IMF loan policies, and now these private military contractors. They bring more war, a chief cause of poverty. War completely undermines countries' development prospects by destroying schools, hospitals, and vital infrastructure. The poisons used to kill in war take fertile agricultural land out of use for years to come. 80% of the world's poorest countries have suffered a major war in the last 15 years, and 9 of the 10 countries with the highest child mortality rates have suffered from conflict in recent years. 9 of the 10 countries are in Africa. A white paper produced by a UK group, War on Want, noted that there were private military contractors who have worked recently or are currently working in the Congo, where between 5 to 10 million people have been killed, and in Zimbabwe, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, Liberia, and the diamond-rich Kono district of Sierra Leone and Nigeria. The mercenary companies provide a wide variety of services previously carried out by the national military forces. However, they remain outside the law, and because they have no national allegiance, constitute a threat not only to the countries in which they operate, but also to every country on the planet. The services they provide include direct combat intelligence training, security and conflict zones, consulting and planning, maintenance and technical assistance, operational and logistical support, and post-conflict reconstruction. To the people who come in contact with these landlocked privateers, there is little to distinguish between such soldiers and the country of origin soldiers where their headquarters are located. This has been a very big problem in the Iraqi conflict. Cynthia McKinney uncovers foreknowledge of genocide in Congo. According to congressional action chaired by former Representative Cynthia McKinney on covert action in Africa, a smoking gun in Washington, D.C., evidence was presented that implicated the U.S. government, the UN, private militias, and Western economic interests of having complete foreknowledge of pending civil unrest in Africa, and they all refrained from action prior to the Rwandan genocide. An estimated 800,000 or more people were killed in this paroxysm of insanity. The goals in letting this slaughter happen were to use war, disease, hunger, and poverty to cover up the centuries-old exploitation of the African continent. As SAIC, Science Application International Corporation report stated, displacing people has become a goal of war, not just a consequence. This is the definition of terrorism. In his role as middleman for the De Beers cartel, Maurice Tempelsman, according to submitted evidence, helped shape practically every major covert action in Africa since the early 1950s. Declassified memos and cables between former U.S. presidents and State Department officials over the last 4 decades implicate Tempelsman as having direct input in the destabilization of the Congo, Sierra Leone, Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Rwanda, and Ghana. The hearings confirmed that he was directly involved in the overthrow of Ghana's first elected president, Kwame Nkrumah, and the CIA-backed assassination of Congo's first elected president, Patrice Lumumba. The Western countries now have practically unrestricted access to diamonds, gold, cobalt, manganese, petroleum, natural gas, timber, uranium, and columbium tantalite, a strategic and scarce mineral found almost exclusively in eastern Congo and used by Western nations in computer chips. Project Censored 2007 reports that an estimated 6 to 7 million Congolese have perished in the West's accelerated pursuit of the Congo's wealth since 1996, and the world remains silent because the media that is controlled by the same interests who profit by plunder has led the world to believe that Africa is dying from the ravages of AIDS. AIDS is a subterfuge for the economic destruction of a continent and psychological warfare against the African people of the diaspora. Tempelsman, as chairman of the Harvard School of Public Health's AIDS Initiative, intends to keep it that way. It's just business. So yeah, basically, can kind of see that basically this is, so you can see when you examine, Haiti and Libya and Syria, right? And, North Korea too, basically they use these these charity organizations to go around the world and basically, provide a cover for their illegal dealings, right, of extracting resources, harvesting, people, harvesting organs from people, or basically, just moving drugs, right? And it's interesting, the Red Cross, for example, and QAnon keeps bringing up the Red Cross and Reds, right, like the AIDS, program, and it's just interesting because the Red Cross is in North Korea, for example. Yeah, I didn't quite know that, and I looked it up earlier today. Yeah, the Red Cross is in North Korea. It's in South Korea, too. It's all over the world, but the point is, these agencies have power to cross borders like other agencies don't, and so, all these rat lines of illegal material, basically come into clear view. And, just to cap off this video, I'll point out some of the newer developments that just kind of show, basically, that it's more likely that this covert, storm, this behind-the-scenes war is happening, rather than it's not. Basically, the U.S. military just started blowing up heroin processing facilities in Afghanistan. I mean, that's major, right? Pakistan, which is integral to the heroin trafficking network, right? All the heroin produced in Afghanistan comes through the Khyber Pass into Pakistan, and then through Pakistan it goes over to Turkey and into Europe, into the Western market, right? So, and Pakistan comes out and says that they will shoot down American drones, right? Their Air Force has been ordered to shoot down American drones, okay? Pakistan historically has been very cozy to the West. ISI, their security service, was established by the CIA, right? So it's very interesting for Pakistan to all of a sudden have this animosity toward the U.S. military and be ready to shoot down drones. Why would that happen? Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that now those drones are delivering missiles to heroin processing facilities, right? So that's very interesting. Right? And, again, you've got this weird video of Barack Obama and Jimmy Kimmel and just all this stuff, and I don't know, I just thought that information would help today in the processing of things, and yeah, basically, if you guys have any thoughts, feel free and let me know, but very interesting to see where this is going, and I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot more fun things coming out real soon. So thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a good one. Cheers.